Hello, my name is Kindson Munonye, and in this presentation I'm going to be taking you through and develop on the schedule management knowledge area, and today we are going to be looking at estimate activity resources. And estimate activity resources follows from sequence activities, the second process, and the project time management knowledge area. So what is estimate activity resources all about? Estimate activity resources is the process of estimating the time, the type and quantities of materials, human resources, equipment or supplies required to perform each activities. Remember that in the define activities process we took the work breakdown structure and broke them down into activities, and now you have to determine the amount of materials, the equipment required to perform these activities. Why do we have to estimate activity resources? Because this process identifies the type, the quantity, and characteristics of resources required to complete the activity, which allows for more accurate and duration estimates. So remember that the estimate activity resources process follows from sequence activities, and this is the third process in the project time management knowledge area. And let's now take a look at the ITTOs of the estimate activity resources process. The inputs are the schedule management plan, the resource calendars, activity list, activity attributes, risk register, activity cost estimates, the EEFs and OPAs. Remember that the activity list, activity attributes, and milestone lists output from the define activities process, which also is an input to sequence activities process, and now they also serving as input to estimate activity resources process. We have some tools and techniques for estimate activity resources, and they are expert judgment, alternatives analysis, published estimating data, bottom-up estimating, project management software. We have three outputs from estimate activity resources process, and they are activity resource requirements, resource breakdown structure, and project document updates. Let's now take a look at each of these inputs, tools, and techniques and output to help us get a clearer understanding of why they are necessary for estimate activity resources. The first input to estimate activity resources is a schedule management plan. The schedule management plan is necessary for estimate activity resources because this helps us to identify the level of accuracy and the units of measure for resources to be estimated. And also we have activity list and output from define activities process. It identifies activities which will need the resources, because if you are estimating activity resources, you are estimating resources needed for each activity. So you have as an input the activity list from the prior process. Of course, we need the activity attributes to help us understand or give us a metadata of these activities. Activity attribute includes the successor, the predecessor, who is to perform this activity, as well as the duration of the activity and other relevant information. So activity attribute serves as input to estimate activity resources. Another input we need is resource calendars. We need resource calendar to estimate activity resources because the resource calendar identifies the working days and shifts on which each specific resource is available. Information on which resources, such as human resources, equipment, and materials, are potentially available during a planned activity period is used for estimating resource utilization. Alright, we've discussed four inputs to estimate activity resources, and they are activity attributes, activity lists, the schedule management plan, and of course the resource calendars. Let's talk a little more about resource calendars. Just a second. Okay, resource calendars specify when and how long identified project resources will be available during the process. So this information may be at the activity level or at the project level. This knowledge includes consideration of attributes such as resource experience and skill level, as well as various geographical locations from which the resource originates and when they may be available. So we are saying that resource calendars a necessary input to estimate activity resources. They help us to know the calendar date at which these resources will be available and help us to make an accurate estimate of the resources needed to complete the activities. Alright, let's move on. Another input that we need for estimate activity resources is the risk register. Well, risks are some things that are inevitable in a project. You must always take note of risks when you are making estimation. And so risk events may impact on resource selection and availability. So risk register is an input to estimate activity resources, and then updates to the risk register are included with project document update from the perform risk responses. Take note that when we talk about project documents, risk register is one of the project documents that has to be updated in course of controlling the project. We need activity cost estimates when we want to estimate activity resources, because the cost of resources may impact on resource selection. So what we are saying here is that you want to estimate resources for an activity, and you see that the cost is very much more than what has been budgeted for the activity or for the project, and that will make you tend to select a different resource, leaving out a different one. So the activity cost estimate helps you to make a trade-off and the cost of activity resources being estimated. And of course, we need enterprise environmental factors to estimate activity resources, and some of them might be the location of the resource, the availability of this resource, and the skill level required to complete the activity. Of course, we need enterprise organizational process assets that can influence estimate activity resources. Includes the policies of the organization, the procedures relating to rental and purchase of supplies, and of course we might need historical information regarding types of resources used for similar work on previous projects. Okay, let's spend some time taking a look at the tools and techniques needed for the estimate activity resources process. The first tool and technique is the expert judgment, and it means that you have to get input from experts in the knowledge area. It may be project managers on similar projects, it may be your sponsor, it may be other stakeholders, subject matter experts, who will help you make accurate estimates of your resources. Another tool and technique we need to estimate activity resources is alternatives analysis. Now, I think this is the first time we are seeing this tool and technique in our discussion of the project management processes. Alternative analysis means that you need to look at alternative methods for accomplishing a particular activity. So alternatives analysis may include using various levels of resource capability or skills, different size or type of machines, different tools, make, rent or buy decisions regarding the resource. So when you are considering alternatives, other ways of doing the same thing, you are looking at various options. This process is called alternatives analysis. Another important tool and technique that we might use to make accurate activity resource estimate is published estimating data. Several organizations routinely publish updated production rates and unit costs of resources for an extensive array of labor trades, materials, and equipment for different countries and geographical locations within countries. So we've discussed 3 tools and techniques that can be used for estimate activity resources, and they are expert judgment, published estimating data, and alternatives analysis. We also have another tool and technique, and this is bottom-up estimating. Bottom-up estimating is very important method of estimating, and it estimates the duration or cost by aggregating the estimates at the lower level component of the WBS. When an activity cannot be estimated with a reasonable degree of confidence, the work within the activity is decomposed into more details. Okay, so and then the resource needs can be estimated. So what we are saying that is that if you have this activity, you want to estimate the resources needed for this activity, and the degree of accuracy or confidence level you are getting is not considerable. You might have to break down this activity into maybe 2 or more activities to enable you to make more accurate estimates. So The estimates that you made are then aggregated into a total quantity for each activity of the activity's resources. So when we are talking of bottom-up estimating, we are talking of taking the lower level components, estimating them, and then going to aggregating them to a higher level. And if a lower level component is not, you find it difficult to make estimates for them, you also decompose into further lower level components to enable you to estimate. So this tool and technique we've discussed is bottom-up estimating. Another tool and technique we might need for estimating activity resources is project management software. This might be a scheduling tool or some other software that may help you organize and manage resource pools and develop resource estimates. Depending on the complexity of the software, resource breakdown structures, resource availability, and resource rates, and various resource calendars can be defined to assist in optimizing resource utilization. Alright, let's now look at the outputs of the estimate activity resources process. But can you recall the tools and techniques we've discussed? We say we have expert judgment, we need bottom-up estimating, project management software, and of course we need alternatives analysis. And we need bottom-up estimating, we've mentioned it, published estimating data. Alright, let's look at the outputs of estimate activity resources. One of them is activity resource requirements, and activity resource requirements identify the types and quantities of resources required for each activity in a work package, and these requirements are then aggregated to determine the estimated resources for work packages and the work period. So activity resource requirements identifies type and quantity of resources. It's just like the major output of the estimate activity resources process. So it tells you the resources needed, the quantities, and the work periods that is going to be covered. Alright, the resource requirements documentation for each activity can include the basis for estimate for each resource, as well as the assumption that we have made in determining which type of resources are applied, the availability, and what quantities are used. Alright, the next output for estimate activity resources process is resource breakdown structure. The resource breakdown structure is a hierarchical representation of resources by category and type. Remember, when we discuss the scope management knowledge area, we talk about the work breakdown structure, but in estimate activity resources we are talking about the resource breakdown structure. It's a hierarchical type chart that represents the resources by category and by type. So the amount of detail and the level of accuracy of the resource requirement description can vary based on the needs of the project. Alright, let's now look at the last output of the estimate activity resources. But before then, we look at examples of resources. Categories might include labor, material, equipment, and supplies. So resource breakdown structure, RBS, different from risk breakdown structure, is useful in organizing and reporting project schedule data with resource utilization information. So this is project document updates might include activity lists, might have to be updated in course of estimating activity resources. Activity attributes might have to be updated, and resource calendars may have to be updated. All these are project documents that may need to be updated in the course of estimate activity resources. This is where we are wrapping it up on estimate activity resources. Thank you very much for joining me in this presentation. I hope this has been informative for you. As usual, I'm taking you back to the ITTO's page so that you spend some time to get your head around it. And please join me in my next presentation as I'm going to discuss estimate activity duration.